attacks he says are on drug boats headed for the U.S. A new drone strike in the Caribbean. 2 people on the boat surviving, then picked up.
In the early hours of October 18th, 2025, something unprecedented unfolded in the waters off Central America. A moment that would redefine how the United States confronts one of the most persistent and evolving threats in the modern world. What began as an ordinary naval patrol off the Pacific quickly escalated into the first full-scale U.S. military strike against a cartel fleet, marking a point of no return. It wasn't just a law enforcement action. It wasn't a drug bust. It was war, an undeclared conflict between a global superpower and a criminal network that had crossed the final line. This is the story of Operation Iron Wave, a mission that changed everything. A mission that exposed how cartels, once thought to be shadowy smuggling organizations, had transformed into something far more dangerous. Well-armed, technologically sophisticated, and guided by unseen foreign hands. And in one violent dawn, that evolution forced the U.S. to respond with a kind of force it had never before unleashed in a war on drugs. A silent ocean turns hostile. At 4:25 a.m., south of Corpus Christi, the sea was calm and unbroken. Then, in a single instant, the ocean came alive. Radar operators aboard the USS Tripoli spotted 3 unidentified vessels moving in tight formation with military-level precision. No lights, no radio chatter, and controlled speeds too deliberate for fishing boats. Within seconds, thermal imaging confirmed what the radar already hinted. These weren't smugglers trying to slip through the night. They were armed convoys, their decks loaded with industrial barrels of fentanyl precursor chemicals, and beneath heavy tarps, mounted weapons and air defense systems gleamed under infrared light. This was not trafficking. It was something closer to tactical warfare at sea. Encrypted alarms sounded across the Tripoli. The report went straight to U.S. Southern Command in Miami. The confirmation came back swift and absolute. Hostile designation confirmed. For decades, cartels had probed American borders, testing response times and tolerance levels. But they had never ventured this far north and never with this kind of hardware. Later intelligence would reveal the shipment was large enough to produce 6.5 tons of fentanyl, a quantity capable of killing 200 million people. This wasn't commerce. It was sabotage on an industrial scale. The decision to strike. In less than half an hour, what began as a detection report became Operation Iron Wave, a coordinated U.S. military counterstrike. For the first time in history, the Navy was authorized to engage cartel vessels as enemy combatants. From the deck of the Tripoli, the first AGM-114R, Hellfire 2 missile tore through the pre-dawn darkness, hitting its mark with surgical precision. The lead vessel vanished in a flash of orange light and steel. A second strike came moments later from an MH-60R Seahawk, its laser-guided munition piercing the hull of a trailing ship, igniting a storm of chemical fire. Only one vessel survived, crippled, burning, and drifting. When U.S. Marines boarded the wreckage, what they found transformed the operation's purpose from counter-narcotics to national defense. Beneath wet tarps lay encrypted satellite transmitters, U.S. coastal navigation maps, and detailed schematics of oil infrastructure stretching from Texas to Alabama. These weren't smugglers plotting profit. They were agents executing a coordinated strike against America's energy supply. The unthinkable discovery. The true shock came not from the drugs or the weapons, but from the technology. Inside the remaining vessel's control deck, investigators discovered foreign-manufactured military components, hardware no cartel could ever produce or acquire without outside help. Someone beyond the hemisphere was arming and training these forces. By 7 a.m., the president signed an emergency wartime directive, reclassifying cartel forces as military adversaries. The move was historic. For the first time, the United States officially recognized that transnational cartels had evolved beyond organized crime. They were now paramilitary threats capable of executing coordinated strikes on American soil. The line between criminal enterprise and warfare had vanished. The sky turns. Against the coast. For a few hours, the sea went quiet. The crew of the Tripoli believed the worst was over. But at 7:13 a.m., radar sites along the Gulf Coast detected something impossible. 6 fast-moving aerial objects streaking low across the water, closing in on Texas airspace. At first, analysts thought they were surveillance drones. Then the readings changed. The machines were carrying thermal payloads and flying in attack formations. They weren't observing, they were hunting. Within seconds, 2 F-35B Lightning II fighters launched from the deck, screaming into the sky to intercept. The first drone was obliterated at Mach 1.2 by an air-to-air missile. The second was shredded by the Tripoli's close-in weapon system, filling the horizon with tracer fire. But the rest of the swarm split apart, diving to sea level and zigzagging through radar blind zones with chilling precision. Their evasive maneuvers weren't improvised. They were programmed, the product of state-level drone AI and foreign military training. One drone made it through. The explosion over Galveston Bay. At 7:23 a.m., one of the drones plunged in a steep dive over Galveston Bay, heading directly toward the refinery complex that supplies nearly 14% of Texas's fuel output. Pilots scrambled to intercept, but the distance was too short. A blinding white flash erupted across the bay, followed by a shockwave that shattered windows miles inland. The blast measured the equivalent of 2.3 kilotons, igniting fuel tanks and creating a pillar of flame visible from Houston to the horizon. Within minutes, news channels were broadcasting live footage. Commentators called it America's second Pearl Harbor. Senators demanded answers. Families along the Gulf watched the sky burn and asked the same question. How could a cartel launch a military-style attack on U.S. infrastructure? The truth was worse than anyone feared. Intelligence linked the attack to Tren Duragua, a Venezuelan-born cartel warlord commanding more than 600 armed operatives and controlling a drone network stretching from Venezuela to Mexico. But the technology behind the attack, the encryption, the navigation systems, the hardware, didn't come from him. It came from somewhere else. Escalation. The United States strikes back. Within hours, U.S. Southern Command raised its alert level to condition crimson, the highest state of homeland readiness since 9/11. The president's new directive was clear. Hit back immediately and without restraint. Under the codename Task Force Horizon, a joint team of 312 U.S. Marines, DEA tactical agents, and Coast Guard interdiction units deployed toward the Mexican coastline. Drones from the RQ-180 Sentinel program had identified an underground heat signature near Veracruz, a hidden facility believed to be the central command hub controlling the drone swarms. Intercepted communications confirmed the urgency. The message was simple and chilling. Phase 2 begins at sunrise. The battle for Veracruz. As darkness cloaked the coastline, Marine raiders slipped ashore. Above them, EA-18G Growler aircraft jammed every frequency within a 40-mile radius, cutting off all communication. The objective: breach and destroy the facility before Phase 2 could begin. What they found underground was beyond expectation. Beneath layers of reinforced concrete lay a massive command complex, walls lined with carbon fiber drone wings, racks of Russian-stamped munitions, and dozens of rocket tubes marked with CJNG insignia, the hallmark of Mexico's most violent cartel. This wasn't a narcotics lab, it was a war factory. The facility was wired with military precision, its assembly tables equipped for rapid drone deployment. Every circuit board bore a single word etched into its frame: revenge. When the Marines breached the final chamber, alarms blared. A red countdown appeared on the control monitors: 38 seconds. The entire site was rigged with C4 charges, programmed to obliterate itself and everyone inside. The EOD team worked at full speed, cutting, isolating, defusing. At 0.01 seconds, the timer froze. They had saved the base, but what they found next was worse. The message. An encrypted laptop still pulsed on the control desk. Its data stream was live, routing through foreign servers. At the end of the code loop, a single line repeated endlessly: Phase 2 confirmed. Stand by for retaliation. The Marines knew what it meant. Destroying this facility wouldn't stop the next wave. It would only delay it. The United States had struck the body of the operation, but not its mind. The counterstrike. Operation Iron Wave. By midday, the U.S. response was underway. Two B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted from undisclosed bases carrying GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, bombs designed to shatter bunkers buried deep beneath mountains. At the same time, in the Gulf of Mexico, the USS Lassen and USS Hopper armed Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles for precision strikes. At 2:45 p.m., the sky over Mexico's Sierra Madre range lit up as a storm of missiles rained down on newly discovered drone hubs. In under 5 minutes, 29 hardened targets were destroyed, 73 aerial threats neutralized, and $2.8 billion in cartel infrastructure erased. The jungle burned for hours, the flames visible on satellite images and seismic sensors worldwide. For the first time since the 1989 invasion of Panama, the United States had conducted a massive, coordinated combat operation in Latin America. But inside the Pentagon, there was no celebration. As the dust settled, new intelligence arrived: cryptocurrency transfers, encrypted communications, and data streams linking the cartel's funding to Caracas, Managua, and Bogotá. The conclusion was chilling. The cartel wasn't acting alone. The war that evolved. By sunset, the skies over the Gulf were filled with drifting smoke and the glow of oil fires. The mission was a tactical success, but a strategic awakening. The cartels had changed, and so had the battlefield. For decades, Americans thought of cartels as drug traffickers, criminals motivated by money. But the events of October 2025 revealed something new. Cartels had become proxy armies, backed by foreign powers testing U.S. defenses through asymmetric warfare. The attack on Galveston Bay wasn't a lone act of terror. It was a message, a probe, a prelude. Inside the Pentagon, analysts began rewriting doctrine overnight. The phrase narco-terrorism was replaced by a new term: narco-warfare. Cartels were no longer to be treated as criminal organizations, but as non-state military actors capable of destabilizing entire nations. The quiet aftermath. By the end of the operation, the results were staggering. 29 enemy installations destroyed, 73 airborne threats neutralized, 3 underground command centers eliminated, $2.8 billion in cartel assets wiped out. Not a single U.S. life was lost. But no one aboard the Tripoli called it victory. Everyone knew this was only the beginning. On the deck, Marines stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon glow orange with the fires of what they'd just unleashed. Some hadn't slept in more than a day. All understood the same truth. The battlefield had moved. It was no longer defined by borders or oceans. It existed in servers, signal chains, and encrypted messages. The next attack wouldn't come from boats or bunkers. It would come through data, markets, and code. Conclusion: the dawn of narco-warfare. As the smoke lingered over the Gulf, America entered a new era of conflict. The United States had not just dismantled a drug network, it had exposed a global shadow war operating through cartels, technology, and proxy alliances. The distinction between organized crime and state aggression had blurred completely. In homes across the Gulf Coast, Americans watched footage of the refinery fires, not realizing they were witnessing the birth of a new kind of war, one that would stretch from the oceans to cyberspace. For the soldiers, sailors, and pilots who lived through Operation Iron Wave, the message was clear. The war didn't end that night. It evolved. And somewhere out there, in the silence between signals, Phase 2 was already waiting.